Hi, scholars. Today we're going to dive deeper into expository text, and we are going to practice answering expository questions, okay? So we have a couple key steps. We want to first read the text, take notes, and highlight important information. Then we want to read the question and highlight what we are being asked. We want to look for key words in the text and then highlight where we find text evidence to support our answer. Then we eliminate wrong answers and we choose the right answer, okay? So I'm going to model this with a text that we have in our curriculum. So let's go ahead and get there. Okay, just give me 1 second. Okay, great. So the first thing I'm going to read is read and take notes on this passage, okay? So this one is called The Gift of Civilization, How Imperial Britain Saw Their Mission in India, okay? If y'all didn't know this, actually, Great Britain used to control the country of India, okay? In the late 1500s, Britain began building an empire. It set up colonies all over the world. These were communities all over the world that Britain took over and controlled from London. In a few hundred years, Britain grew into the largest empire in history. It lasted until the mid-1900s. Now this is interesting, but I think because the title is called Their Mission in India and the first paragraph doesn't really talk about them being in India, I think that's just like an introduction. So I'm not going to highlight any information there yet. But I am going to highlight my title because I know we need to talk about India, okay? Because as we know, Jiggery's father is in India, so I can kind of see how that's going to connect to our story. In the late 1700s, a historian named Gibbon wrote about the rising British power. He hoped that the Maori people in New Zealand would become more civilized thanks to the British. He thought that belonging to the empire world would be helpful to them. Malachi was a British historian writing about 60 years later. In 1840, he wrote about an imaginary future where the British Empire fell. What then would become of its colonies and their people? They would probably look at London the way British looked at the ruins in Rome. Gibbon and Malachi are two examples, but they showed one way people in Britain understood their empire. They viewed it as following in the footsteps of empires like Rome and Greece. In addition, they saw their colonies as a way to spread their way of life. They believed the communities that already existed were uncivilized, and it was the role of the British to help improve them. Okay, so let's go ahead and highlight a couple things, right? This kind of explains why the British might have been in other countries, particularly India, which we're going to get deeper into. So I am going to highlight, okay, they wanted to follow in the footsteps of empires like Rome and Greece. Okay, so I'm going to highlight that part because that's a reason that they were in other countries. They wanted to spread their way of life. Okay. That's also going to be important. And they thought that communities that already existed were uncivilized. Okay, so those are going to be like kind of three reasons why the British were in other countries. There was a problem though. During the same period of time, new ideas about government were becoming popular. Many people in Britain believed in democracy. They thought that people should rule themselves. Why was it right for the British Empire to take other people's land and rule over them? One argument was that Britain was actually helping the people it ruled over. It connected people all over the world and spread knowledge and technology. As an example, some pointed out that the British had once been ruled by the Roman Empire. According to some, Roman rule in Britain helped the country move forward, and the British Empire could help its colonies in the same way. Okay, so I'm going to highlight that too. You know, the British tried to say that they were helping people that they were ruling over. In Britain's image, this is how Charles Trevelyan saw things. He was a British administrator in India. Okay, we're getting into India a little bit more. When it was under British rule, he wrote that he hoped the Indians would still soon stand in the same position toward us in which we stood toward the Romans. At first, he said the British and the Romans were enemies, but in the end, they became friends. So it sounds like he wants Britain and India to become friends at some point. According to Tribbin's linking, the British would pass on the traditions that Rome had passed to them. They would do so by reshaping India, making it more British, by laying down British rules and customs. Trevelyan wrote, the empire was bringing about a change for the better in the character of Indian people. Okay. So I'm going to highlight as well. They wanted to make India more British. The Romans adopted the Greek way of life, and the British adopted the Roman way of life. Now the Indians would adopt the English way of life. As Malachi famously put it, British rule in India would bring about a class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions and morals and in intellect. Malachi thought British was helping the people in its colonies. Still, he believed that the empire would someday fall. Even so, he thought that tastes, ideas, and ways of life the British Empire was spreading to its colonies would live on. Then, he said the empire will have completed its mission. Okay, so I'm also going to highlight he believed the empire would someday fall. He thought the taste, ideas, and way of life of the British Empire was spreading to its colonies would live on. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to highlight another important part. All right, now that I have read and I've highlighted important information, I am ready to answer my first question. Okay, I've highlighted information, so I'm going to read the question and highlight what we're being asked. Which detail from this section shows how the British Empire planned to reshape the Indian people's identity? Okay, so we are looking for text evidence, right? So I want to highlight that we're looking for a detail. Okay, and we want to see how they plan to reshape the Indian people's identity. Okay, so we want to have an answer choice that has to do with their identity, all right? Now, I could go back in the text, but basically the evidence is right here. So I am really just going to go ahead and read the answer choices and see if they have an answer choice about the identity. Okay, so A says he wrote that he hoped the Indians would still stand in the same position towards us in which we once stood towards the Romans. Does that have to do with my identity? Their identity? No, not really, right? This doesn't really talk about their identity. So I am going to eliminate it, and I'm going to actually highlight in black so I don't see that answer anymore. Perfect. All right, B. At first, he said the British and Romans were enemies, but in the end, they became friends. That also does not have to do with their identity. So I'm going to eliminate that one. By laying down British rules and customs, Trevelyan wrote, the empire was bringing about a change for the better in the character of the Indian people. Okay, that could be kind of about identity. They're laying down British rules and customs. So I'm going to leave that there. And then D says, the Romans adopted the Greek way of life and the British adopted the Roman way of life. Now the Indians would adopt the English way of life. So that kind of has to do with identity as well. I'm gonna look closer at the question, how they planned to reshape the people's identity. Well, C is telling a little bit more of like a plan to reshape the identity. So I'm gonna go ahead and eliminate D, and I'm gonna choose my answer as C because it seems like the best option. Okay, so notice how I read the text. I looked at the questions, I paid attention to like what I was looking for specifically. I went through all the answer choices, and then I ultimately was able to pick the one that I was the most confident in, okay? So by using the same text, and I'll leave my highlights for you as well, you are going to do 2 more questions and see how well you comprehend the text. All right, I'll let you do some independent work, and then we'll go on to our writing activity.